August 25th, 2025. Neither myself nor the suited one made a move at first. Instead, we simply stared at each other for what felt like ages, but really couldn't have been longer than a few seconds at most. During our standoff, I contemplated to myself what options I had. Surrender was a non-starter. If they got the chance to put me back in my cage after this escape, they likely wouldn't leave me alone to attempt another. And that was assuming they didn't just kill me outright. Running away wasn't really an option either. The suited one was blocking the only exit, and even if I managed to get past him, I had no way of knowing which paths would lead me to freedom. Ultimately, the suited one was the first to make a move, reaching down to the black box on their chest and shouting into it in order to alert the rest. "Code red!" I repeat, code. In a split-second decision, I lashed forth one of my tendrils and slapped the box off of their outfit, sending it skittering under a nearby table. Clearly panicked by my sudden movement, the suited one glanced frantically about the area before plucking up a scalpel from one of the nearby desks and lunging toward me. Pain lanced through my system as the suited one's impromptu weapon impaled my central mass, and at that very moment, it became clear what I would have to do. Only one of us was going to be leaving this lab alive, and I intended it to be me. Reaching up past the scalpel, I wrapped my tendrils around the appendage holding it, and bent its fingers in random directions until I heard snaps of bone giving way. Relinquishing their weapon onto the floor with a clatter, my assailant cried out in agony and grabbed onto their damaged hand with the one that was still intact. Taking advantage of this momentary opening, I leapt onto their torso and began to search for a way past the plastic barrier. The suited one grabbed desperately at me as I crawled all over it, eventually managing to get a hold of my central mass and launching it to the ground before attempting to stomp on me. Grabbing onto a nearby table leg and yanking myself towards it, I managed to narrowly evade my attacker's boot as they brought it down with surprising speed, far from a fatal blow, but not exactly pleasant should it have landed. Continuing to survey the suited one's armor, I found no obvious chinks I could exploit. The outfit was sealed tight, as though explicitly to keep me from getting in. Then, however, my gaze fell upon the scalpel. Red lights flooded the formerly white lab with an ominous glow as shrill mechanical cries almost like those of a dying animal echoed through the area. Before I could properly react, the laboratory door slammed shut, leaving me sealed in with my opponent. There was no time to linger on those details, however, with the suited one before me still very much active. Retrieving the dropped scalpel and wrapping one of my tendrils around the handle, I grabbed onto the suited one's leg and with haphazard precision sliced a sizable gash into it. I'm not sure if the suited one knew what I was trying to do at that moment, but clearly they understood it as a threat, immediately reeling back their boot before punting me full force into the far wall. Though neither my collision with their boot nor the wall actually dealt any significant damage, it nevertheless separated me from the suited one for long enough that they dashed back toward the door and began banging desperately upon it. "Help me!" they shouted, growing more frantic upon glancing back to see me undulating forth. "Please, help me!" Again the suited one kicked at me, but this time I was prepared, grabbing onto their boot and crawling up to the opening I had previously created before slithering inside. Immediately, the screams amplified as the suited one's remaining good hand grasped desperately at me from outside the suit in a frantic attempt to halt my upward advance. "Oh God, it's in my suit!" Crawling up to their chest area, my central mass was suddenly bombarded with blow after blow. Apparently, having failed to hinder my movements, the suited one's next plan was to try and scare me off with pain. Unfortunately for them, their attempts to harm me would prove futile as I simply crawled around to their back and continued my ascent. At last, squeezing myself up through the suit's collar, I quickly maneuvered myself over his speech hole, sticking one of my tendrils as far as it would go down the orifice until his then muffled screams were at last quieted. Reflexively, the suited one reached up to claw at me, but their hands were halted by the screen over their face. Desperation slurred their movements as they labored to remove the barrier ironically meant to shield them from hazards like me. With the seconds blitzing by, I noticed the suited one growing increasingly sluggish. At first, I hadn't a clue what could be causing such a thing, but reaching down with my other limbs to investigate their torso, I discovered something rather intriguing. Under normal circumstances, these creatures' chests would rise and fall rhythmically, yet here no such thing was occurring. Clearly, by occupying their throat, I had somehow disrupted a vital process. With each passing moment of struggle, the suited one seemed to simultaneously grow more frantic and yet less coordinated. It tried to bite down upon my tendril with the white protrusions in its mouth. Ineffective as this method was, it still hurt quite a bit, and so I reached inside with another limb and began ripping them out, flooding the suited one's maw with thick red liquid. At last, following a long period of struggle, my attacker managed to remove their faceplate to claw at me directly, but by that point they were far too weak to do anything. The suited one's legs gave way, depositing them onto the laboratory floor with a loud thud. Pain and terror danced behind the suited one's glassy, tear-filled eyes as they looked upon me with overwhelming dread. With the light behind their eyes beginning to dwindle, I wondered if my freedom was worth taking a life over. Was this what the soft one would want me to do? No. For a moment, my grasp upon their skin weakened and I began pulling myself away. Then, however, taking a closer look at their face, my cells were flooded with recognition. This was the creature who took away the soft one. This one was more than just bad. This one was evil. Rage bubbled up within as my hold tightened once more, choking away the last of this evil being's consciousness. Torturing me was one thing, but to lay their hands upon the soft one with aggression was unforgivable. With my first victim down, clarity returned to my thoughts as I peered about the laboratory in search of an escape route. Nothing. My only way out was the sealed-shut lab door. All of my efforts would be for naught. I wasn't strong enough to force the door aside, and without word from their compatriot, the ones outside would surely not be opening it anytime soon. When I first heard voices coming from under a table, I thought that perhaps I was hallucinating. Crawling over to investigate, however, my eye fell upon the discarded black box, still buzzing with activity. "Derek, are you okay in there?" came one of the voices, calling out presumably to the now dead one on the floor beside me. "Dr. Kane, cams are down. We do not have eyes on you. Please confirm your status." Retrieving the black box and returning to my aggressor's body, I looked hesitantly upon it. Well, they are already dead. Isn't it more wrong to let their biomass go to waste? Once again prying open its mouth and reaching inside much as I did before with the pink lump, I began mapping out the structure of this one's body systems, especially the throat and lungs. Once I had that memorized, I crawled in with my full body and moved to the inside of its head. As was true with my prior subject, this was where all the thinking was done. Unlike the pinky, however, this lump of cells still flickered with phantom activity. Instantly, as though propelled by some unknown instinct, I wrapped my tendrils around the mass and began lighting up my own neural network in unison with certain parts of this one, slowly digesting and integrating it as I went. Memories and thoughts flashed through my mind at a rapid pace. Most connections I found too weak to properly grasp, and as such they were quickly discarded. Sifting through the stronger pathways, I tested each one until I found those that were most useful. Given the brain's low activity, I wasn't able to glean anything more than a rudimentary understanding of their language. For this, however, basic knowledge was all I really needed. Consuming the rest of the evil one's biomass, I took advantage of the bodily template provided to me by its suit, and began shaping myself to fill it, creating a decent approximation of their external body plan to go along with the internal one I had mapped out. Hobbling awkwardly over to the still active black box, I wrapped my new fingers around it and replicated the movements previously done by the evil one before speaking into it. "Help me! Please help me!" I wailed, repeating in the evil one's voice the phrases I now understood to imply distress. "What's happening in there, Kane?" came a voice I recognized as Yellow Suit, apparently requesting clarification. "Are you injured? Is the organism contained?" "Injured. Organism contained. Please help me," I continued, taking advantage of the words used by Yellow Suit, words I now somewhat understood but still couldn't quite pronounce until I heard them first. "I don't like this," came another of the voices, their tone saturated in suspicion. "He doesn't sound right. What if it's not Kane and we're letting it out?" "What if it is Kane and we're letting him die?" replied a third source, presumably another of the suited ones. "We can't just leave him in there." Their deliberation continued for another minute or so, as all the while I shrieked and pleaded for them to let me out. Finally, when it came time for Yellow Suit to make a decision, he whistled to quiet the others before proceeding. "You're right, Smith. Go and open the door. Reed Bradley, cover him just in case." Sounds of rapid footsteps echoed outside the lab as the suited ones arrived to free me. "Don't worry, Kane. We're getting you out of there," called one of them from outside the door, before at last opening it to reveal on the other side 3 figures, a suited one, accompanied by two individuals dressed in splotchy green armor with bulky black devices in their arms. "What the fuck is that?" shouted a splotchy one, immediately pointing their black device at me alongside the other and pressing down on a trigger to send streams of tiny projectiles rocketing into my torso. Apparently, this disguise wasn't quite as foolproof as I had hoped. Painful though they were, these metal missiles did very little to actually disable me, only damaging a small circle of cells with each hit. Diverting biomass to extend my arms into thick tendrils, I reached out and wrapped them around the two weapons focused upon me, before ripping them away from the splotchy ones, disarming them. "It mimicked Kane!" shouted the suited one into their black box. Taking advantage of my momentary reprieve from damage, I lunged forth towards the suited one and wrapped my newly formed jaw complete with calcified teeth around its neck, ripping out a sizable chunk of flesh before quickly swallowing it into myself for digestion. With a significant portion of their throat removed, the suited one ceased to speak and instead fell limp onto the floor, leaving only two more bodies in my way. In a surprising demonstration of bravery, or perhaps stupidity, one of the splotchy ones responded to this by retrieving a long knife from his side and charging me with it, attempting to plunge the weapon into my face. The addition of an extra eye was very useful in perceiving depth, allowing me to more effectively avoid attacks like this one. Sidestepping a swing of the knife, I quickly calcified one of my arm tendrils into a sharp spike before driving it into their spine, eliciting a scream of pain from the splotchy one, which I quickly silenced with a stab into their mouth. As for the third assailant, I made sure to take my time with them. Clearly my disguise was not good enough to sufficiently fool a human, which was apparently what these creatures called themselves. As such, I required more information. Grabbing onto the surviving splotchy one's ankle as they attempted to run away, I yanked them back toward me and sloughed out of my suit to properly engulf them. Operating with a still active brain, I was able to gain a far better understanding of their language. Borrowing a few Hox genes from their sequence and translating them into my own genetic library, my next attempt at replicating their body plan would boast significantly fewer flaws. Absorbing the rest of these ones' available biomass, I returned to my natural amorphous form and began making my way down the hall. Soon enough, I came to a dead end in the form of a sealed bulkhead. On the other side, I heard the vague chatter of those who remained. "Help me!" I called out to them, mimicking a splotchy one's voice. "Please open up." Much to my chagrin, it seemed that the others had caught on to this particular trick. "That is some skinwalker shit," shouted a suited one from the bulkhead's other side. Clearly they weren't going to open up for me like they did last time. Unlike when I was trapped in the lab, however, my biomass would be more than sufficient for a brute force approach. Searching the obstacle before me for any exploitable weakness, I was able to determine that it had dropped down from the ceiling, once again assuming a vaguely humanoid form. Though significantly larger than before, I hardened my arms into spikes of bone and drove them into the bulkhead before using them to lift it back up. Instantly, I was greeted from the other side by bullets, as what must have been every suited one and splotchy one in the entire facility unloaded upon me with their weapons. Pain is a very useful sensation to determine when one is in danger and which parts are suffering damage. That being said, with each bullet still causing me to flinch slightly, I decided that perhaps toning it down a bit would be smart. Commanding my cells to dull their pain receptors, I lunged forth in total disregard for the tiny injuries being inflicted upon me, effortlessly cleaving and devouring my way through the ones firing upon me until only a handful remained. Two suited ones, a splotchy one, and Yellow Suit himself. Whereas the suited and splotchy ones wielded larger and smaller black weapons respectively, Yellow Suit seemed to be toying with something else entirely, a bulky makeshift device with a small flame in front of its barrel. Pinning the final splotchy one against the wall with the intent of finishing it off, I was suddenly bombarded with an inferno as Yellow Suit pointed their device at me and pulled the trigger. Whereas the other weapons had been all but useless when it came to destroying large swaths of my biomass, fire was the perfect weapon for doing just that. Abandoning chunks of burning biomass, I quickly killed off the last two suited ones with impaling tendrils to the face, before maneuvering myself behind the splotchy one in hopes to avoid the tongues of flame now following me. Fortunately, the notion of killing his own gave Yellow Suit just enough pause for me to slap away his flamethrower before snapping the last splotchy one's neck. Grabbing onto Yellow Suit and slamming him to the ground, I ripped off his faceplate to lock eyes with him before speaking. "Where is the soft one?" I demanded, leaning ever closer to his face. Suddenly, realization flashed in Yellow Suit's eyes as he answered my question with one of his own. "You're not just mimicking, are you? You're actually talking." "Correct. Now tell me, where is the soft one?" I demanded once more, wrapping a tendril around his arm in preparation to break it should he refuse to answer. "What do you mean by soft one?" He stammered, clearly not understanding my question. "Are you referring to a person?" "Yes. The soft one was with me before suited ones took her away." "Where is she?" For a moment, the one in the yellow suit seemed to contemplate what I was saying. When at last realization flickered behind his eyes, I picked him up by the neck and repeated my question once more. "Where is the soft one?" "If you're referring to one of the researchers you were confiscated from, then I imagine they're in protective quarantine at Facility Epsilon in the state of New York," he wheezed. Understanding precisely none of that, I decided to ask for clarification. "Where is that?" "Halfway across the country from here. Southeast." Clearly I wasn't going to get too much more than that out of this one. For a moment I considered consuming Yellow Suit along with all the dead ones. However, given that he had told me what I wanted to know, I decided to set him down and allow him to run away. Of course, this decision wasn't entirely altruistic, as following his path I was able to find my way out of the facility before at last stepping out under the clear blue sky. Galactic Coalition Classified Research File 28A, UAO Communication Trial 1. The Hunger. Clearance Level Black Hole. Author, former Dr. Sivik Seflin. When I first requested the crew and resources for this project 5 stellar years ago, it had been abundantly clear that the Council of Minds thought me mad. However, as their efforts to contain or even understand this threat have again and again proven worthless, it appears that somebody important got wind of my idea and considered it worth a try. Perhaps speaking directly with these entities could provide us with previously inaccessible knowledge into their motives and potentially even weaknesses. Sifting through UAO-dominated worlds for instances with high neuronal activity, I have selected a number of candidates for this project. Our first subject was the superorganism residing on the Delta Pavonis system's sole habitable planet, though perhaps a formerly habitable is a more adequate description for the now conquered world. Records obtained from the fallen Qualmut species suggest that UAOs possess the ability to absorb neuronal information, including languages, by consuming the brain tissue of other organisms. As such, I have for this experiment procured death row inmate Wemin Paraglaz, a war criminal convicted of countless heinous crimes during his deployments. In exchange for their waiving the right to a peaceful death, Wemin has requested a post-mortem pardon and the payment to his family that such a thing entails. My superiors assure me that this request will be honored. Launching Paraglaz via a specialized pod equipped with advanced speakers onto the conquered planet's highest peak, my research assistants calculated a UAO arrival within roughly 2 minutes. After recording a final message for his son, Paraglaz exited the pod and was predictably consumed by the UAO. For the sake of his family's peace of mind, I plan to personally assure them that the death was painless. Checking scanners once more, increased neuronal activity was indeed detected surrounding the site of consumption, indicating an absorption of information as predicted by my hypothesis. Finally, activating the pod speakers, I was able to establish communication with the UAO. Audio transcription. "Hello? Can you hear me? My name is Ziwick. I am a researcher for the Galactic Coalition. I'd like to have a word with you. Ask a few questions, that's all. Why? We want to know more about you, why your species do what they do. Perhaps you could enlighten us? Ask. I am listening. Okay, do you have a name? Something you go by? They called me the Hunger. A fitting name. And who exactly called you that? Those who ruled this planet before my arrival. What were they called? That is no longer of consequence. I consumed the last of them long ago. And may I ask what your reason was? Why did you attack them? They were weak. I was hungry. A simple equation. Tell me more about what happened. I want the details. This world taught me its rules from the moment I touched down. Eat or be eaten. Kill or be killed. Every living thing here played the same game of survival. I was just better at it. Was there any point where you thought you might lose? No. There was nothing here sufficient to halt my advance. By the time I weighed as much as the snack you just gave me, the game was already over. My victory was assured. What about the sapients of this world? Surely they at least were a challenge. As I said, they were weak. The technology they had oh so perfectly honed for the killing of their own kind was worthless against me. Placed before my perfect consciousness, schemes plotted by their most cunning leaders to rout me were like the machinations of particularly dull children. If all you wanted was food, then why bother launching your offspring into space? It is the natural drive of all species to survive and procreate. Surely you are educated enough to know this already, Doctor. Your species is sexually dimorphic. Tell me, do you have a mate? Young? Of what concern is it to you? None at all. Merely asking a question. If you must know, then I do indeed have a partner and 3 hatchlings. How cute. The sapients of this planet birthed live young. Such small and helpless creatures, yet so tender and delicious. I see. Have you anything else you'd like to put on the record before this planet is sterilized? Do what you must to me, for I have accomplished my purpose. But know this, Doctor. You can no more halt our conquest than a mote of dust could snuff out a star. May your young live long, fruitful lives, and may their young prosper on many worlds. End audio log. Initial contact with a UAO has yielded mixed results. On the one claw, I am overjoyed that the communication itself worked. On the other one, though, I cannot shake the feeling that in those moments I was speaking with something unimaginably sinister. August 26, 2025. Surrounded on every side by wilderness, the facility I'd been interned in seemed as though it were intentionally designed to be as far from civilization as physically possible. Peering about in search of Yellow Suit, who had exited the building mere seconds before me, I found no sign of him. Perhaps that was for the best. He had already served his purpose. Large metal devices with 4 black wheels each sat dormant just past the front door, awaiting masters that would never return. Leaving the lab behind, I wandered aimlessly through this untamed landscape, in search of anything that might indicate a nearby human presence. Soft blue skies gave way to a blanket of blackness as my journey continued into the night. At first, this newfound darkness was unnerving to me. My eyes lacked the necessary adaptations to adequately spot danger in low-light conditions, leaving me with an uncomfortable feeling of vulnerability. Fortunately, my first night beneath Earth's sky was not pitch black. Pinpricks of radiance shone down through the darkness alongside a larger white orb, helping to illuminate my surroundings and casting a gentle silver glow across the water-slicked surface of a gray stone path. When first I discovered this road set at the bottom of the ridge on which I stood, I wasn't sure what to make of it. The formation was structured too discordantly from the surrounding area to be natural, leaving me to conclude that it was a man-made phenomenon. Why would the humans waste so much time and effort to create such a path? Distant roars of unknown origin interrupted my contemplation as reflexively I shriveled back from their source, nestling myself into the nearby brush as a metal beast traveled down the stone path at high speeds, illuminating the darkness in front of it just enough that I could glimpse the humans sitting inside as it howled past me. Though vaguely different from those back at the facility, I nevertheless recognized it to be the same type of device as the motionless ones I'd seen before. So that is what the 4-wheeled machines are for. Interesting. With my newfound knowledge of the Gray Path's purpose, my next step towards finding civilization was made clear. Whatever these paths were connected to would likely be well populated with humans. Humans who could perhaps direct me to New York, where the soft one was being held. Keeping just behind the tree line in hopes to obscure myself from any more passing vehicles, I skulked for hours along that roadside, traveling in the same direction as the car had been going. Save for that lone vehicle, however, I saw no others traveling this road. Despite this, I held on to hope that my intuition would be rewarded. For the most part during this journey, I decided it best to maintain a humanoid shape. Though I was much too large at the time to truly pass for a human, I nevertheless figured I'd get used to such a body plan so that I could better blend in later on. While I will admit it was rather awkward at first to maintain balance, this form very quickly grew on me. There was a certain elegance and versatility to it that I rather appreciated, though it would take me far longer than just one night to truly master a human physiology. Dutifully following the trail for what must have been hours, soon enough my cells began to cry out for sustenance. Just as I was contemplating eating one of the trees, however, something on the road caught my eye. Quadrupedal in structure and with strange branching horns atop its head, this creature was laying motionless upon the path. Carefully climbing down the ridge and approaching this mysterious animal and peering into its large, glassy eyes, I very quickly determined it to already be dead. Though by this point I was no longer overly squeamish about killing, after what I'd done to those suited ones back at the facility, the idea of a meal that I wouldn't have to personally murder was still rather appealing. Hunched down beside the corpse in preparation to feast, I decided that I would begin with the head, ripping it off with both claws and holding it by the antlers to consume. The eyes of this creature were actually quite interesting, boasting an extra layer of tissue that appeared rather useful for reflecting light back into the retina. Taking a few moments to copy this adaptation, I found the difference to be almost literally night and day, with the area around me lighting up by a significant margin. I didn't spend too terribly long testing this, however, as at the moment I was far more interested in eating. After making short work of the creature's head, I turned my attention to the rest of it, clawing off hefty chunks of flesh and shoveling them greedily into my maw. In hindsight, it probably would have been smart of me to drag the animal off the road so that I could consume it in peace rather than doing so in the middle of the road. So absorbed had I been in sating my hunger that I didn't even notice the sound of a vehicle approaching until its front lights shone directly upon me. Looking up from the grisly remains of my meal, I peered past the vehicle's headlight glare and directly into the eyes of its driver, who looked upon me with abject terror. I probably look rather frightening to them, don't I? Without even thinking, I stood to my full height and took a step toward the vehicle, hoping to clarify my peaceful intent. "What the fuck is that thing?" shouted a voice from inside the vehicle, which upon closer inspection contained 4 total passengers. "Don't know. Not sticking around to ask it," snapped the driver in reply, his shout accompanied by the shrill squealing of tires against the road as their vehicle began moving backwards at a rapid pace. Looking at where the reversed machine was going, I could see rather clearly that it was headed straight for a ditch by the roadside, so naturally I chased after them to try and prevent such an unfortunate accident. This too was not the smartest idea in hindsight, as all my pursuit succeeded in doing was panicking the group further. "Oh God, it's chasing us!" shouted the one sitting beside the driver as he grasped the man's shoulder and began to shake him. "Turn the van around and drive forward, you idiot." "Does it look like I have time to do that?" replied the driver, momentarily taking his eyes off of me to regard the one beside him. This brief period of distraction served only to exacerbate the vehicle's crooked course, sending its headlights skyward as the back tires slipped off the path. Sounds of metal crunching echoed through the air in symphony with their screams. Quickly returning to the tree line in order to contemplate my next move away from their line of sight, I watched as one of the machine's doors popped open and 3 individuals staggered out into the night, disoriented and terrified. "We all saw that, right?" asked the one who had been beside the driver, his long black hair swishing to the sides in correspondence to each rapid movement of his head, eyes searching the area for any signs of my presence. "Yeah, we fucking saw it," replied another of the individuals, this one with lips colored a bright red, momentarily re-entering their crashed vehicle before emerging with a black device much like the ones that had been fired at me back in the lab. "Only question is, where did it go?" "Guys, Jack is out cold," hissed the third figure, reaching into the vehicle and shaking the now unconscious driver in what I presumed was an unsuccessful attempt to rouse him. "We can't just leave him and run. Not until he wakes up, at least." Looking upon the group of humans before me, my conclusion was that while indeed frightened, they nevertheless seemed ultimately harmless. Perhaps they could assist me, I thought to myself. Obviously they would be doing no such thing while I looked like some creature out of a horror story, and so I quickly formulated a plan. Leaving behind the majority of my biomass and commanding it into the brush, I assumed my natural amorphous form, and with it seeped down into the ditch alongside their crashed vehicle. Slowly oozing into the machine through the large doors on its back, I quickly sifted through the various items stored there, until I came upon a bag of human clothes, like the ones they were wearing. Retrieving the most nondescript articles, I took them into myself and retreated back into the tree line before finally packing as much biomass as I could into a correctly proportioned humanoid form. "Are you guys all right down there?" I called out to the group in a youthful voice derived from their own chatter. "We're all alive, if that's what you're asking," replied the bright-lipped one nervously, lowering their weapon as they looked upon my unassuming form. "But we just got chased by something on the road and now Jack's unconscious." Carefully navigating down the ridge slope in my best approximation of what a human doing such would look like, I once again spoke out to them. "I haven't seen anything on the roads," I lied, hopping down from the slope before jogging toward the group at a pace reasonable for one of their own. "Whatever it was, I'm sure it's gone now." "Who are you?" asked the one with long hair, regarding me with what I recognized as skepticism. "And why are you out here at night in the middle of nowhere?" For a moment, I allowed his question to linger in the air as I contemplated an adequate cover. My name is Samael. My vehicle broke down a ways back and I've been stuck here for most of the night. Damn. Sorry to hear that, man, replied the one with red lips, buying my story without any significant resistance. My name's Ollie. Nice to meet you. I'm Lucas, interjected the one with long hair, extending their open palm toward me for some reason I didn't understand at the time. The one at the wheel's name is Jack, and the guy trying to wake him is Will. What are you guys doing out here so late at night? I asked, reflecting Lucas's question back onto them in hopes to learn more about these individuals. Awkwardly retracting his hand after my failure to reciprocate the greeting gesture, Lucas jabbed his thumb at the side of their vehicle, where some kind of symbol was emblazoned upon the door. We're a band, Arcturus Penitent. We're on tour, and our next show is over in Fargo. Fargo! Repeating the word to myself quizzically as I searched through borrowed memories, I ultimately came up with nothing. It's the biggest city in North Dakota, smirked Ollie, seeming rather proud of himself for whatever reason. About an hour's drive from here as far as my GPS told me. Immediately I perked up at the mention of a city. Cities were places where lots of humans lived, humans who could help me find the soft one. Any city was better than this wilderness, but still there was something I had to know. How far away is Fargo from New York? Judging by how the group looked upon me in response to my question, I had said something they found rather strange. Are you serious? Asked Lucas, continuing on before I even had the chance to reply. New York is several states away from here. We stopped there on tour a while back. So you know how I can get there? Sure we do, replied Ollie, reaching into a flap in his pants, and from it producing a piece of paper depicting what I presumed to be the landmass we were on. This is around where we are, he said, pointing to the right side of a shape labeled ND. Where you want to be is all the way over here. Slowly dragging across the paper, his finger moved slightly down and far to the right, before at last coming to rest on a shape labeled NY. At last, after many minutes of Will attempting to rouse his friend from unconsciousness, the driver began to stir. What happened? Asked Jack, his gaze lazily drifting between the others as he stepped out of the vehicle before landing upon me. Who the hell are you? I am Samael, I answered, extending my hand towards him just as Lucas had done with me. I'm trying to get to New York, but my vehicle broke down. To my surprise, the driver met my outstretched hand with his own, grabbing onto it before shaking lightly in what I instantly understood to be some form of greeting gesture. Samael, huh? He half chuckled, lips curving upward in amusement. Let me guess. Religious parents? I didn't really know how to respond to that question, but fortunately for me, I didn't have to, as Will very quickly interjected. Whatever, we need to get out of here, he stammered, his eyes frantically searching the tree line just as the others had. That thing might be gone for now, but for all we know it'll come back. Have you seen the van? Asked Lucas nonsensically. Of course they'd all seen the vehicle. They were looking at it. There's no chance we're getting far on foot and our ride's stuck in a ditch. There's no service out here to call roadside either. Hearing this, an idea began to take shape within my collective mind. If I can help get your van unstuck, will you people take me to Fargo? I mean, I guess we could, but how would you even do that? Asked Jack. I'll push it out, I replied matter-of-factly. Large as the vehicle was, it nevertheless seemed remarkably light for something made of metal. I could almost certainly move it by myself. For a short while, none of them said anything as they looked upon me. Perhaps, given the limits of human biology, they assumed I wouldn't be capable of such a feat. Eventually, however, Ollie spoke up in my favor. Maybe he's right. If one of us drives forward and the others push, maybe we can get it out. For a few minutes, the group quibbled amongst themselves as to who would drive and who would push. Due to Jack having been knocked unconscious and apparently concussed, the others seemed unwilling to let him perform either task, instead insisting that he stand aside until the deed was done. As the debate concluded, it was Will who got in behind the wheel as Ollie and Lucas joined me in the ditch. All right, guys, called the new driver, lowering the glass barrier on their vehicle's side in order to peer back at us. On a count of 3, I'll push down on the gas, and you 3'll push as hard as you can, all right? 1, 2. Though I understood most of their words, the human counting system remained utterly foreign to me, and as such, I hadn't a clue what they meant by on the count of 3. So deciding to play it safe, I just started pushing. I'll admit, It wasn't as easy as I'd been expecting, but with a short burst of effort I was able to force the van upwards and out of the pit. 3! Looking back towards the pit, Will's eyes widened in shock as he saw me pushing the vehicle up on my own. For what it was worth, I could tell the other two tried to help me, but their efforts didn't really amount to much. "Damn, Sam!" called Jack from the sidelines as I managed to force their van's back tires out of the mud. "I can call you Sam, right?" Sam works," I shrugged, starting momentarily as the two pushers mirthfully placed their hands upon my shoulders and jostled me excitedly as though I'd done something intensely impressive. "That was amazing," said Lucas, clasping one of my hands into his own. "You're crazy strong. Are you a bodybuilder or something?" "Yes, actually, I built this one myself," I replied, eliciting a few laughs from the group, who apparently dismissed it as a joke. Quickly piling into their slightly damaged vehicle, Ollie opened one of the doors on its back and gestured for me to climb in. "You said you wanted a ride, right, Sam?" Inside the van, large cloth containers of various shapes and sizes were piled high behind their seats. Looking upon the largest of these bags, an idea popped into my mind. "Is it okay if I grab one of my bags?" I asked. "Sure, man," Ollie and Jack both replied almost in unison. Quickly making my way back up to the tree line, I summoned forth the rest of my biomass and carefully coaxed it into the vague shape of the largest bag I saw. Packing the biomass as densely as I could both into my human form and the false bag, I was able to get all of it. Unlike my human disguise, the bag of biomass I'd created likely wouldn't stand up to close scrutiny, but I got the feeling they wouldn't look at it too closely anyway. Returning to the group's van and placing both my forms inside, I pulled shut the back door, and together we drove off into the night.